To the October Standards and Assessment Committee meeting, and I do apologize for starting a little bit late. I erroneously mentioned that I thought the meeting started at 9:15, and it is 9 o'clock, so we have a couple of board members running a little bit late. So my apologies to the public and to the board members for that. That was an error I made last night. But we're gonna switch things up just a little bit so that our action items are just a little bit later in our agenda, not too much later. But we do have a public comment, and this is from Janine Montgomery, if she wants to come up. And just introduce yourself and go ahead and you can share your comments with us. Just, I think it should be green if you push the button there. There you go.
Okay. Good morning, members of the board, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am Janine Montgomery, the secondary math specialist for Ogden School District, with 30 years of experience in math teaching and supporting of math teachers, both in the AGA, Algebra, Geometry, Algebra 2 model, and the integrated model. My focus is equitable student success. While local choice has value, I do not support running 2 mathematics pathways statewide or returning to the AGA model. First, mobility. Many Utah students transfer between schools and districts during high school. The AGA and integrated models are organized differently. Transcripts and learning progressions do not align. Students who move midstream will miss overlapping concepts. A single statewide pathway safeguards continuity for our most mobile students. Second, assessment and accountability. Comparing outcomes across 2 fundamentally different course sequences is logistically impossible. 1 high-stakes test would unfairly advantage 1 pathway, while 2 tests would break comparability and weaken statewide data. 1 pathway enables a single, rigorous assessment and fair accountability. Third, alignment. From kindergarten through 8th grade, our students learn mathematics in an integrated multi-strand progression. Continuing with an integrated sequence sustains instructional continuity, strengthens connections between algebra, geometry, and statistics, and removes the algebra interruption that can sometimes slow momentum. The integrated model directly supports the portrait of a graduate. Not only does it advance academic mastery and build critical thinking and problem solving, it also encourages creativity and innovation as students have to apply tools across the different mathematics strands. And through spiraling, it cultivates hard work, resilience, and lifelong learning. The integrated model also aligns with personalized competency-based learning, or PCBL. Because the AGA isolates content, a student who struggles in 1 strand may stall. By contrast, the integrated model keeps multiple strands in play, letting students leverage their strengths, receive flexible supports, and demonstrate competence as they progress. I have taught the AGA sequence for nearly 2 decades before transitioning to the integrated model. Implementation was challenging and required significant shifts. However, I found that the integrated model delivers stronger student capacity and broader access to advanced concepts. Continuing with the integrated model and without the introduction of additional pathways statewide, USBE's mission of creating equitable conditions for student success will be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So, anyways, we're going to introduce ourselves now. So thank you, Janine. And anyways, if you want to stick around, that we've got our math that's going to be introducing what the feedback was in just a few minutes you can listen to. We don't have anyone online, right? Does anyone? Okay. And do we have any board members online? So okay, we'll just, so Jenny Earl, I represent District 1, and I'm the chair of the Standards and Assessment Committee. Go ahead.
I'm Joanne Brinton. I represent District 15, and I'm the vice chair of Standards and Assessments, which I represent the southern part of the state.
Leanne Wood, District 4, South Davis County and North Salt Lake.
Okay, and when our other board members get here, I'll have them introduce themselves. So we're switching our schedule up a little bit, and we're going to start with our math piece. So come on up. And just so the public knows, we are getting feedback on draft math standards that have been out for the 90-day public comment review. And our math specialists, which I'll have them introduce themselves in just a minute, are providing us with some context of the feedback that was given and just kind of let you know where we're at. So that's where we're at in the agenda. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Earl. I'm Molly Basham. I am the Early Learning Mathematics Specialist. We are excited to be here with you this morning. As you said, the 90-day public feedback window for the math standards ended on September 17th at 11:59 p.m. And we've received a tremendous amount of feedback from the public for which we are so grateful, and our writing committee is so grateful. We received 713 responses on the Qualtrics survey that was used to solicit public feedback on the draft standards. 29 official comments were recorded during the 4 public feedback meetings that were held around the state. And the writing committee has now begun the challenging work of reviewing all of that public feedback and making updates to the draft P12 Utah Core Mathematics Standards. So far, we have held 2 meetings with the writing committee. We actually met with them earlier this week on Tuesday and Wednesday, so September 30th and October 1st, and they began that work of reviewing the public feedback and making updates to the draft. If you are interested, and we'll do a real quick high-level review of some of the themes that came out of that public feedback, we did link in backup the complete public feedback document that the writing committee is working on reviewing right now. It is over 300 pages, so we will definitely not go through that today, but that is something that you as members of the committee or members of the public can review, since that is in the backup document. There is tremendous feedback. We organized it by question from the Qualtrics survey, and then within those questions, we tried to really break the feedback down by feedback type and then by themes within that feedback. Largely that was so that the writing committee could really try to have discussions around particular topics as they were reviewing the feedback, but also to make it more readable as folks go through the feedback that was collected as well. So if, Andrea, we could click on that condensed graphic recommendations or open that document, if you can find it. There we go. Yeah, that's the one. So we have shared updates every month that as we were receiving the feedback, but we have this document is the condensed graphic representation of the public feedback. We made this document just as a way for folks who wanted to go through it and kind of see at a high level what information was shared between those 700 plus responses to the Qualtrics survey and all of the people who shared during the public feedback meetings. So we had representation from counties across the state, really high representation, of course, in some of our bigger, more populated counties, but even many of our rural constituents did show up to provide feedback as well, which we really appreciate. If you could scroll for us, Andrea. The second question in the survey asked people, these were optional, so they did not have to self-identify, but asked folks to identify what stakeholder groups to which they belonged. So we had tremendous amounts of parent responses, teachers' responses, as well as some people who identified as school administrators, other school staff, higher ed, and other categories, which included math specialists, it included concerned grandparents, it included graduate students. So we had a really wide range of expertise from all stakeholders around mathematics education. If you could continue scrolling, please. We asked the public to share any feedback they had regarding the introduction section of the core math standards. As I stated before, we kind of organized by type of feedback, and then we broke things down into further themes. So that first graph shows of those folks who chose to respond to this question, 87 of those responses were supportive of the introduction section as it was written. 9 of them were critical comments, but they didn't necessarily contain actionable feedback. 67 of those comments contained some kind of actionable suggestion that the writing committee could really consider making a change on. And then 11 comments were unrelated to the question that was posed. It was either not related to the introduction, not related to the math standards at all, but they did not contain an action recommendation. And if you continue to scroll down, we broke those comments down further to some of the themes that came out. There were comments about the integrated versus a traditional algebra, geometry, algebra 2 pathway, comments about data science, about fluency, about the inclusion of the skills, about language clarity. Deviation from the Common Core was a topic that came up. General support for the writing committee was a big theme that arose. General frustration with mathematics came up sometimes. There were specific standard suggestions, not necessarily on this question since it asked about the introduction section, but as we went through some of the subsequent questions, there were lots of really great standard-specific feedback suggestions, questions about the pathways that were drafted in secondary 3, comments that didn't necessarily fit in one of these categories, and then comments about honors and extended standards. So those themes continue throughout the entire document. Question 4 asked the public to provide feedback on specific grade bands, whether they were commenting on the elementary standards, middle school standards, or high school standards. So again, you can kind of see that breakdown between standards that were just supportive of the draft as written, that were critical but not necessarily actionable feedback. We received lots of actionable feedback in this space. And again, a couple of standards that weren't necessarily related to the question asked or weren't related to the mathematics standards at all. And that same breakdown of themes really arose in this question as well. If we keep scrolling, I won't explain every single graph because those categories really do repeat themselves throughout questions. But question 5 asked folks to share any feedback they had regarding the strands throughout the graph. So that would be in elementary school. There's accounting and cardinality standards in preschool and kindergarten, standards about numbers in base 10, algebraic thinking, and those strands grow and develop throughout the standards. So people provided feedback in that space. If you keep scrolling, I think the question that has been most powerful so far in our conversations with the writing committee is question 6. Andrea, which would be the next one down, perfect. And this is where we ask the public to provide feedback on specific standards in the draft. So we received, if you keep going down, a tremendous amount of actionable feedback in this space, and the writing committee has had such incredible, thoughtful discussions, and they're so excited to make changes based on the feedback that has been suggested. They're really focused on improving language clarity. They've made some broad overall shifts already in the way that the skills were included in the standards to ensure that the mathematics content was elevated and the skills were supporting. So they've made some of those shifts, which I know is something we've talked about before. And just standards or shifts around trying to make sure that language is being used consistently and clearly throughout the entire document. So this feedback from the public has been tremendously helpful. And then question 7 asked people to share any additional feedback they had on the draft. So that has also been a space where the writing committee has really been able to dive into what the public is saying and make some great shifts to improving the language and clarity in the document. Okay, and then as we go on from there, the remaining questions are related to the addendum that was added to the public feedback in the June board meeting. So you can see these ones are broken down a little bit differently because some of these questions were asked as asked in such a way where we asked the public to their support for the recommendation, whether they agreed with it, disagreed with it, had no opinion, and then there was a large number of non-responses to these questions. So as you go through these, the addenda items, you can see that the graphs are organized to people who said they did not support the recommendation, they did support the recommendation, they did not have an opinion on the recommendation, and then we also just documented the number of surveys that were returned with no response. So question 8 asked about reordering the kind of layout of the standards. Question 9 was about including time and money competencies in the standards at the lowest grades. I won't go through the graph completely. So if Andrea, if you just want to kind of slow scroll through, I can just read off what those questions were. Question 10 was about adding a competency for scientific notation in 8th grade. Question 11 asked about changing all references from to mathematical ideas to mathematical concepts. Question 12 recommended removing the phrase developing strategies to agree and disagree respectfully. Question 13 suggested an alternative set of simplified mathematical skills for the public to review. This one we did ask the public to provide feedback specifically since it was an alternative suggestion to the standards. So in this case, you do see those breakdowns similar to what was in the earlier questions where we categorized comments to say whether they were in support of the draft as written, in support of those simplified skills, if they provided a suggested modification, or if the response was unrelated to those simplified mathematical skills. We did get some responses that really weren't related to that question. Question 14 included an alternative set of standards for preschool through 5th grade in data science. So again, we categorized those comments. We asked folks to provide feedback on the recommended alternative standards, and we broke that down into comments that were supportive of those supportive of the draft as written, comments that were supportive of those alternate standards, comments that provided some kind of suggested modification to the data standards, and again, comments that were unrelated to the question asked. And then question 15 asked the public whether they felt like they had an interest in weighing in on the algebra 2 geometry, that traditional versus integrated response. So this one was posed as a no, yes, no opinion question. And then we also asked the public to share any additional feedback they had regarding that discussion. So you can see kind of that quantitative response there. And then question 16 really breaks down their qualitative responses, their short answer, into whether it was supportive as the draft is written, in support of doing an algebra 2 model, whether they suggested some kind of actionable modification to those secondary pathways, or again, if responses were made that were unrelated to the question asked. So this gives kind of a high level look at what came out in the public comment. And then these were themes that were recorded during the public meeting. So again, comments that were just supportive of the draft, comments that suggested actionable feedback, which our public meetings really had a lot of that. And then if there were any comments that were kind of like unrelated, again, to the math, and broke down those public comments from our public comment meetings, not from the survey, by themes as well, using those same themes that ran throughout the document. So that just gives you kind of a high level overview of what came in that feedback without necessarily reviewing the 300 plus page document. But if you are interested in, as I said, the full length version is there if you'd like some light bedtime reading and you want to read through all of those public comments.
And we are interested.
Some of them are really fun. We
are.
received so many really thoughtful, incredible comments from the public, and some that you have to laugh when the public has the opportunity to share their thoughts with a government entity. They share their thoughts.
Which is great. We'll take it, right?
We'll take it.
Yeah, and with that, I haven't got all the way through them yet, but I'm getting closer. Are there any questions, comments from the committee before we? Yeah, go ahead.
So, kind of like what you just said, what I was finding is that you've got like, yay, and then you've got, so how do you guys approach that type of feedback as you start to then revisit and reapply? Like, what does that look like for you? What seems to rise to the top? And I appreciate that there is an area. Oh, sorry. Check. Okay. Sometimes I'm afraid of these things. But you said that you'd organized it into actionable items. So what does that look like in this part now? Because we are, just for the record, there's 323 pages of feedback. So thank you, Utah. Yay.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, everyone, for caring so much about math. We love that. We have a really rigorous protocol that we've established with our writing committee to make sure that we are really reading, reviewing, and attending to every piece of feedback, whether it's supportive or critical. I like how you described it as grr. I like it. I have a 2-year-old at home. We do lots of grrring in my house, but we have a really rigorous protocol with them to make sure that we are reviewing all of the comments. That's part of why we really tried to break things down by theme so that we could read all of the comments related to data science, whether they were supportive, whether they were critical, whether they were actionable, and really have discussions about like, what does this look like as a big picture? What is the broad message from the public actually say? And then after having that discussion, the writing committee is then making their decisions about how are we going to tweak and improve the graph based on all, or the draft based on all of those comments and feedback and their expertise and knowledge of research. And then in that document, you can see in the version, the full 323-page document, there is space for the writing committee to check off that they have reviewed each section and whether or not changes were made to the draft based on that section of feedback, and then a place where they are going to provide justification as to why they made the changes that they made, or they chose not to make changes based on that feedback. Does that answer your question?
One thing that I've seen with the comments, it did kind of come back to maybe some of my concerns with being specific in the math in what we're asking them to learn, like the scientific notation. There was the factoring one that came in, like where's factoring and how does, so when you see, because I brought in my books, right, for you to see. I mean, I have 2 full novels of math. So, and I know we can't get 2 full novels into our standards. So how do you decide, like, for example, if factoring didn't show up in these standards quite yet, how do you decide if they should stay out or if they should be put in, and then how does that affect the standards that come before or after factoring?
Absolutely.
As an example.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the writing committee, when the review committee in the early steps of the process passed on their recommendations, one of the recommendations that was passed was to try to slim down the standards. There's too much content to cover in any given grade level. We need to try to slim it down. And so that was something that the writing committee in their initial draft really tried to do. And as they were doing that, we tried to have conversations around how can we slim down without missing critical content? And the public feedback has been a great place to point out things like you called out with the factoring. There were concerns about quadratic equations in secondary and how that was defined in the standards. Those are spaces where the writing committee is now having conversations that revolve around the fact that we slimmed things down, and there may be places where we slimmed things down too much, and we need to add additional content. So there are conversations happening both in elementary and in secondary around maybe we combined 2 standards into one and that wasn't the best idea. We need to break that back apart into 2 standards. Or maybe there was a space where detail was removed and we thought it was okay because we talked through, I say we, the writing committee talked through the standards so much and knew exactly what they meant, but given public feedback, it wasn't actually as clear to the public what was intended by that standard. And so those are places where they are having conversations and making decisions now of we might need to add a standard back in, or we might need to change the language, or we might need to break one standard into 2 because it really covers too much content. That's something that they are working on right now.
Hi, I have a couple of questions. As I'm only about a third of the way through all the public comment because there's 323 pages, but some of the things that stood out were that the honors is going away. Why are we taking honors away in the secondary schools? I saw quite a few comments of concern about that, and we're talking as we're realigning our mission and vision for a board about aligning with the legislature's vision to elevate, to have Utah be at the top, that we want to lead out. So I'm concerned about honors going away. Can you talk about that and explain that?
Yes, Mike Spencer, the secondary math specialist. So the honors was never an intention from the committee that honors would disappear. The conversation was around the extended topics, which they chose to handle in a different way. So the extended topics, when you look at Math 1, Math 2, and Math 3 in the current standards, those extended topics cover the pre-calculus curriculum. And so students could take the extended topics in Math 1, Math 2, and Math 3, and then they could skip to calculus that following year if they engaged in the extended topics for each of those. That's how LEAs have been using honors currently in the system. But we also have honors in the middle school space. where there are no extended topics. So honors in general is a local LEA decision on how they're structuring that. And so the intention was never to make that disappear. However, when they did look at the extended topics, there were lots of conversations about the honors content that was in Math 1 and Math 2 was really not foundational in preparing for calculus, and that students could still prepare for calculus without some of those topics. And so the calculus pathway that was created was designed to say, hey, this has everything we need, so students can still go Math 1, Math 2, and then on that calculus pathway, still be prepared for calculus that following year. There is questions about like how do we communicate around that, because that is something that's been a common misconception when you look through the comments that's gone. And there's also a wonder about a broader conversation about honors on how do we provide guidance and the intentionality about how that would look. There's some great research across states right now around automatic enrollment into honors programs or advanced mathematics courses that a lot of states are adopting policy on that we'd be interested in having conversations around. But absolutely, that's something that is important and is not something that the committee had any vision of saying we should not have any honors.
Good. I wonder if we could create some kind of maps to provide to LEAs so that they have different levels for kids that really want to level up and do math quick. Like, here's a track that you can take, and here's how, like, do you guys provide that already? Or could we work on that from the state level to provide to LEAs?
Yes, absolutely. And because in pathways in general, that another piece of feedback was a lot of people were confused by what exactly is happening in the pathways. So we're in the process right now. We're hoping to have it completed for today, but don't have it yet, is to have a graphic that really outlines, hey, here's the pathways and here's what's included. The honors is a little bit different. We'd like to do a graphic. We didn't know if that belonged in the pathways one there. In a lot of states, they have an onboarding ramp for an honors system in the middle school space and in the secondary space. So if a student started engaging with mathematics later on and they really grew into it, that they weren't locked out of that because they didn't engage in it too early. So those are opportunities we'd love to be able to explore, as well as to be able to help provide guidance. I know that's a local LEA decision, but maybe having some graphics that could help, given a vision of what options are there, would be helpful.
Well, I wonder if we could highlight some of the students. I know we have one in Washington County who's on the advisory, like, student committee for the state now, John Holler. And he's one that has done that. He'll be graduating from Utah Tech with his bachelor's degree at 18, when he really should be a senior in high school, concurrently. And he's created this Math Up initiative. Like, he would love to talk to junior high kids and others and just get them excited about math and the possibilities where it can lead into coding and different tech jobs. And I just wonder if we could highlight students somehow and have them, I don't know, show some of the amazing things that are possible. So it gets kids excited about why math. Like, because it's an essential, it can be an essential skill depending on what you want to go into later in life. So thank you for what you do. Appreciate it.
I was going to ask, do we feel like the new honors is now like IB, AP, concurrent? It feels like now, there used to be an honors class, an AP, really, but now there's so much of the IB now. Even like I was learning that where I went to elementary school is turning into an IB elementary school that goes into a junior high. And I was like, what? IB elementary. Okay. So it feels like now, like, being in honors, if you're in like AP classes, concurrent classes, or in the IB program, that's kind of honors in a way. It's not an honors program in the same sense as like what we have, but it does feel like that has been a change now. There's not, I don't know.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, that there's a lot of opportunities for those students there. In the public comments, they explicitly called out Math 1 and Math 2. That they wanted to make sure there were opportunities for students to engage in honors there, which again would be a local LEA decision about how that would look. And so we just want to make sure that somehow we're communicating and saying that we hear that concern. In a lot of our other content areas, I don't know that we we don't have honors standards in other content areas, right? And in the standards document itself, I don't believe that there's guidance in that document around honors that I'm aware of.
Right. So the lower level math doesn't have honors because it's like 10-10, 10-50 is concurrent, whatever 1040, stats 1040, and then AP, calc, stats, AB, BC, whatever, right? That's more of like the upper level, that's all included, but not for the math 1, math 2.
There's just not extended topics
Okay.
currently written
All right,
into
that
it for
makes
Math
sense.
1 and Math 2.
And part of the intention of the writing committee also with removing those extended topics, best practice for education of gifted, high-achieving, accelerated students is not necessarily to just do more content, which the existing extended topics really were just, you're placed in this honors course, we're doing extended topics, so we're just covering more standards. We're gonna do more work in the same amount of time. The intention of the writing committee really is, rather than doing more work, we're gonna potentially, you could still have an honors class in secondary 1 or secondary 2, and the intention is we're gonna go deeper than what your gen ed class might be going into those same standards. We're gonna look at this in a more complex and robust way, rather than just covering more content in the same amount of time. That both aligns better with best practice for educating high-achieving students, and also then doesn't shut the door for a student who maybe struggled in the middle school space and didn't get the opportunity to engage in an honors course starting in secondary 1. It enables a child who maybe was struggling in middle school to take that gen ed secondary 1 class that isn't an honors level course, and then if they're excelling, be able to get into an honors or an accelerated track later on in the system without having missed content in the earlier classes.
So I appreciate that because I have seen a lot of the honors classes, it's just faster. It's not deeper, it's not higher level, it's just faster. I've noticed a lot with research that there appears to be this movement of moving away from honors because now everybody can participate. Do you see that? Have you seen that with research, that it pays off in the end to get everybody in the same class with just those extended topics? So they go a little deeper themselves, right? Is it more of an independent learning with the extended topics if there's not a specific honors track, but does that make sense at all?
Yeah, there is research around value in having a heterogeneous population of students that are able to build off of understanding from each other. But there's also research around providing access to making sure that we have access for all students. Many states are exploring an auto enrollment policy to have access to those, knowing that access to higher level mathematics, really students, research is showing the foundation they have is having a big impact on how ready they are for that content. So making sure that there's measures in place to say, are they ready to engage in this? So the policies that are currently happening in a lot of states are saying in 5th grade, they may have the end of level test where any student that would score a 4 at the end would be automatically enrolled into an honors level course. And then the parent could choose to opt out after that if they wanted. But the idea is that we're going to press all students into this as an option. If we're showing that they're ready for that level of content, then they would put them there, and then parents could make a decision. If that test was not, did not show that they are ready, but the parent felt like that they still want to be there, those policies in other states are letting them choose to enroll their child anyway if they're saying, hey, there's other indicators that we think their child is ready for this. And that is what those states are trying that. There's states like Texas and Washington and Florida, I believe, I think was the other one. They've actually seen a much higher representative equitable outcome in the people having access to those courses with that auto enrollment policy. So it's something that as a team we're interested in exploring further.
Okay, sorry. I had another question too about, have you all, Wasatch, are they the only county LEA that we have in Utah that allows schools to choose whether they want integrated or the traditional path?
They aren't doing,
Or-
they aren't doing that.
Is that not what they're doing?
No, but they are allowing, instead of that integrated 3, they're doing a 10-10 if a student wants to go
Yes.
that
So
direction.
oh,
So they're
okay.
starting in that college level. It's a full year course. And then they are also, if the student needs additional supports, they're providing those supports through a math lab, I believe. So by the time they get to college, a lot of students they're finding are going in that pathway with the supports, and they're successfully completing 10-10 and 10-50. Is that
Yes.
an accurate statement?
That's accurate.
Yeah.
And in our update, in our graphic that we're in the process of creating, we've explicitly called that pathway out as an option. We're calling it the integrated math route, so math 1, math 2, and then this idea of the math for all in the math 1010 course that they could do as a general preparation for any QL course.
I would say this, I met with them about a week and a half ago, just again to see, I wanted to see their outcomes of the data that, right, they didn't have it in the spring when I met with them, and in order to be credited for it, you have to have a C- on the assessment, right? That's the lowest you can get on the, for the course and for the assessment, and they just had, it was like 90% of students were passing it with at least that C-, right, for those, for the 1010, 1050. It was amazing to see, because that has been the hiccup for a lot of students getting into college, is that successfully navigating those math. Although it does beg, once again, are we really getting kids prepared so they can successfully navigate that math if we've got to do, extensions that are broader? But anyways, yeah, I don't know if that.
Okay. And I had a question. I noticed one of the math teachers was talking about why are we switching from practices to skills, and raised concerns about that being confusing because they've been trained on math practices. And so does that mean a switching out of all the curriculum and their trainings? Can you talk to that?
Yeah, we can speak to that. So that switch also came out of the recommendations that came from the review committee. It was a place where the recommendations from the review committee were to uplift the standards for mathematical practice in the existing core, and some of the recommendations that came from the board were to get rid of them. So the switch to calling them skills was actually, the writing committee really wanted to lean into what is in code, where code defines a standard as outlining the specific knowledge, skills, and competencies that a student needs at each grade level. But the writing committee has also read that feedback, and there are several shifts that they have already decided to make to the standards. The skills as they wrote them are slightly different from the standards of mathematical practice that currently exist, but still also well aligned in some spaces where those are still critical skills and practices that we want students engaging in mathematics. And the writing committee unintentionally, when they settled on a final list of skills, the order didn't necessarily explicitly align with the order of the standards of mathematical practice that's in our current core. And so that's something that the writing committee is revising. They're going through and just reordering to try to make sure that they better align with what teachers know and are familiar with. So if existing standard of mathematical practice 4 and skill 4 are similar, that will make it easier for those curricular materials and for teachers who really know those mathematical practices to make that transition from one-to-one. And the writing committee is also talking about, do we need to call them skills? We wanted to really lean on that language from code, but if there is this big push in public comment that's like, that's confusing, we know our practices, do we call them Utah's mathematical practices instead of calling them mathematical skills? And in our explanations of what they are, we can say these are skills and practices that students need to be able to engage in at each grade level.
Okay, go ahead, Hallie.
Okay, so I have another thing that I wanted to share. And then I found a comment here, which it says, please weigh the committee expert recommendations over the voice of a couple of elected officials. And I know last month I maybe got a little clear. After that, I did have the opportunity to meet with about 5 or 6 in one setting superintendents, and we had a nice lengthy conversation about math standards. And I asked at one point, just in full clarity, I said, without filtering, do you want traditional math? And one superintendent, yes. And people were like, whoa, but then we were all sitting up in our seats, everybody's really engaged. And that was, there was a lot of support for that. I need you to know that. I need the math committee to hear that. There's a lot of support for that. And here's why. I didn't know this. It is very, very difficult from this discussion and putting things together. And one person said, because they can't get curriculum. They said that to find the curriculum, that the textbooks that fit with what we have is extremely difficult. Now, I'm sure that there could be big debate on what that actually looks like. It sounds like in your region, they just spent a lot of money buying new curriculum, whatever, but it is a consensus that it is very difficult to find curriculum that falls into integrated math. Is it right that Utah is 3 out of all of the states that just does integrated?
Yeah.
So I just want to put
It's
that out
mandated.
there. That is a difficulty that they are trying to address. So it's like, okay, I want to be able to open up that for them. And then I'm going to bring in a personal experience here as well. When our district came in and they confiscated all of the textbooks, like who confiscates textbooks from a school setting? You know, it's appalling. And now what's happened is kids are at the mercy of what's taught in class on the whiteboard, what may or may not be given on a computer program as they work through it, and anything that may or may not be put on Canvas. If they don't have a depth of those three, which I see a lot, these kids, they don't have anything. So then we see these tutoring programs pop up at school. So now not only do you send your kids to school all day, but then they have to go for 1 to 2 hours of tutoring, 2 to 3 times a week to understand the math. And so, you put all these things together over the course of 10 years, and you say, and then you have superintendents that are saying, this genuinely unfiltered feedback. It's very hard to find curriculum. So I wanted to just bring that message. Please take it to the writing committee, have that conversation as part of like our request to be able to offer, that other option that we've been asking for the beginning, because there is a very high demand in my district. So it's not just, 3 crazy board members or 15 crazy board members. These are very thoughtful, in-depth discussions that we have with our frontline educators and our superintendents that are very passionate about giving the best for their school districts.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that too. I've been reaching out to my superintendents more, so it's not just me and what I've heard from parents or constituents, but I wanted to make sure that I was representing them and math teachers as well. And 2 of my districts have just purchased new curriculum. And so there are questions about why do we do this overhaul every 5 years? And if it's forcing them to buy new curriculums, they do not want to have to do that. So 2 of them just this year have purchased new 5-year contracts, right? So, and I know we're going to be exploring this, is there a way that we can do standards reviews, but not do big overhauls that force the districts, kind of pigeonhole them into having to ditch curriculums and spend so much more money? I want to make sure we're not beholden more to vendors and money being spent, but that we're letting local control and superintendents with their curriculum experts decide what's best for their district and have multiple options. And that's why I would love to see the dual option where superintendents in their districts can choose. Do they want to do the integrated math, or would they like to do a traditional to college math, and let them be freer?
Yes, go ahead, Sarah. I was just going to say that, and it goes along the lines of the curriculum and buying curriculum and the textbook piece. I don't need a physical book. I'm an audiobook girly, but I do know that what is important is the technology piece of textbooks, and there's something called open educational resources, which, like at Salt Lake Community College, we've saved students $22 million in not having to buy textbooks because of open educational resources. It also provides flexibility for the curriculum to change without having to purchase and spend a lot of money on the physical textbook. So not in all cases is an open educational resource or an online resource beneficial for students. And by the way, with most of these, even though they are available online and easily updated and changed, students can print them out. They can print, if they love having a physical textbook, they can print them out. But it does give more flexibility, and it allows to be more adaptive to curriculum changes or changes that are made at the state level on the standards, or even on the LEA level with the curriculum as well.
I'm going to say amen to that, because there are some excellent materials out there that are just, and some that you can modify and use how you want to, enlarge or not. not that I'm going to advocate for one, but there's one that I use that is just extremely good.
Right. And do you
So-
remember going to buy your textbooks in college? It was like so expensive. And so these resources are available. Like students pay a $5 fee, and that gives them, that's all they pay for their open educational resources. It saves so many students money.
I'm just saying, I'm not really for the going on and doing the math, right? There's a lot of programs out there that you go on and you do this, and you do this, and you do this. And it's not really kids writing or, doing those things that actually develop the architecture of the brain. But there are extremely good resources out there that we could be vetting and using in districts instead of millions of dollars, narrowing that down and really using some great online things in a way. Yeah.
We do have quite a number of LEAs that are using various open educational resources where they are using a program that's freely available, and then they might be each year purchasing like the consumable student components where they're buying the workbook where students are
Yeah.
writing down and solving problems and making models, and that has the homework sheets that they might tear out and take home. So we do have a number of LEAs around the state who are opting to use something that is that model where the money they're spending each year is not on paying for a program, it's on paying for the student resources. But because curriculum is a local decision and LEAs get to choose, there are other LEAs who are paying for a curricular program where they are working with that vendor and having a 5-year contract.
Yeah, and the one program I'm familiar with is truly what I would call an integrated algebra program. And it integrates those geometry principles as you're learning the algebra pieces, which is what I would have always considered algebra to have been, is to have those pieces as you're learning to square, you're doing Pythagorean theorem. You're not waiting until geometry to do that, but you're expanding in geometry, right? So that's why I really think we could kind of open and think a little bit. And just one other item, does anybody else have anything? Okay, I was gonna say, the other thing, and this is what I've been kind of researching the last little bit, is how much grade inflation we have throughout the nation. If you've read, there's a number of articles out there, I can send a few. ACT they had a contractor with use ACT over the last 5 years and actually look at the ACT scores and the grades kids are getting. And these grades are inflated, and we don't have, we've got all these great grades going on in math, but we're not showing any increase in the ACT scoring, or actually decrease, right? And so there is this idea that we're moving kids along, or the rigor is not there, and we're giving them grades. And I don't know if it's part of the equity grading systems that people are using around the nation that really are not leading to responsible grading practices that's doing this. But I do think that there's something there, right? And this is something we can measure over time, and we're actually seeing some problems associated with that. We're inflating the grades, but it's really not leading to more math understanding or better outcomes in the, like I said, I'm just throwing that out there because it's kind of those wonky things, right, that we're looking at, but we've really got to be asking ourselves, are we able to turn out students who, and this is from the beginning, this was my argument, it shouldn't matter where you live. You should be able to have such foundational principles in math and understand those concepts that you can choose, that the choice is there, not so much that you have to take, this math class or that math class, but that you choose to take that math class or that math class because you have the skills and you're competent. It's now as you get into those upper grades. So you've heard that from me before. I don't have to repeat, but that's what, as I look at these, that's what I say is this laying a foundation for the next grade in such a way that we are creating the ability for students, no matter where they live, that's the interesting thing, where they can be successful. And we see teachers, we did that in the spring, right? We went and visited teachers from all over that actually didn't matter where they lived, they were able to successfully help these kids succeed. Didn't matter their economic background, didn't matter any of that, but they were highly successful. Those are the things, and those are more than standards. We know that, right? It's curriculum, it's practices, it's routines in the classroom, it's all those things, it's teacher training. They actually have to understand what they're doing. They can't just, right, hope they can get through math class again today, right? That kind of thing. So anyways, that's my 2 2 cents. Anything else? Okay, thank you, thank you. We appreciate all your work, and thank you for letting us switch our schedule up and letting you come first. Yeah, we appreciate it, so, on my behalf, for my error. We are going to go now back up to 2.2, which is the alternate science standards, the DLM-EEs, and I'm sure someone's going to explain a little bit of that to us. This is the revision, and who's presenting that? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Leah Voorhees, Deputy Superintendent of Student Achievement. And several specialists will be joining me. I'm going to do the overview first of all. So the State Board has a contract with the Dynamic Learning Maps Consortia to develop and assess alternate achievement standards. And the title of those alternate achievement standards is the Essential Elements. According to the IDEA and according to your rule, R277750, you must include students with the feds require that you include students with disabilities in your accountability system, which may include alternate achievement standards and aligned assessments for students who have the most significant cognitive disabilities, which is students generally, to give you some idea. IEP teams determine what that means, but to take an assessment, an alternate assessment, which should be based on instruction in the alternate standards, a student should have an intelligence quotient score, a cognitive ability score, at least 2 standard deviations below average, and also have adaptive skills in that range, which adaptive skills means personal skills, more life skills, the skills to take care of oneself, community, social types of skills. The essential elements are not separate or distinct standards from your core standards. They simply reduce the breadth, the depth, and the complexity of the standards so that they're accessible to students with significant cognitive disabilities. The DLM Consortia revises, it's a group of states that we've been working with for almost the entire time I've been at the state. Yeah, 15 years look at that. So they revise the standards every few years based on the revision of core standards in member states, just as we have been doing. And the data collected from member states about the ability of students to access and make progress in the essential elements, which is the federal requirement for students with disabilities. As a result, the DLM Consortia is proposing updates to the consortia standards. We have specialists here who are going to just give you a brief overview of the proposed updates, and you have those in backup. For your information, you did update your contract with the DLM Consortia just a few months ago, actually. And we have 2 members of our team, both Tracy Gooley and Sid Carter, who are members of the governance advisory board of the DLM Consortia. So we are proposing for you to review and accept the consortia revision of the DLM science standards.
Okay, before we go to that, I just want to, before we even get into the standards, does anybody have any questions on what was just said?
Alternate achievement standards
I just want to be
in
careful.
general.
Yeah. So, no questions on that. We all understand who's impacted by this, how they're assessed, what standards we have, right? Okay,
Let me add
because
one
I
more.
had questions, so I assumed you guys got all yours answered, or did this all make sense to you? I just wanted to make sure I understood.
Let me
Yes, go
add
ahead.
one more piece of important information. So the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the current version, which is ESSA, requires that states only assess 1% or fewer of their students using an alternate assessment. So we're really talking about the students with the most significant cognitive impairments. It's a very, I put the number in the agenda item, but it's a very small proportion, very small, of students who are instructed using these standards and then who take the assessment that is aligned to these standards.
Okay, now with that being said, we'll turn time, oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just to clarify, so on the crosswalk, the 26 essential are what, are they already approved? That's what they will be tested on? Or are we approving 26 and 27? I guess that was my one question on the crosswalk.
So I'm going to ask Tracy to respond to the technical questions, please, Chair.
Yeah, perfect. Tracy Gooley, I'm one of our special education assessment specialists here at USBE. The crosswalk that you received was the crosswalk of the previous essential elements that were adopted by the board. It would have been 5 years ago. And then the 26 ones are the updated ones that will actually go into what they call operation or be tested and instructed next year.
Okay. Does someone want to just, I don't know if they, what do you want to do? I have questions on one. So this, having all this in place, this thought process, who's tested, the limited number of students, why they would be tested in this way, that's how I looked at this from. I looked at the standard itself, the original standard, the simplified version of the standard in order to meet the standard. And then I kind of said, how would they be teaching this, right? I mean, that's how I went down the list. And I don't, do you want to share any more? And then I do have one question on one of the standards, so. Maybe there's no more to share.
Maybe we should hear your question first.
Okay. So like I said, I went through those. There were, and they're very similar in nature. I just would wondered, is this something that is comprehensible and teachable versus one of the other standards? So the standard I'm looking at is the SCIEE 12.LS. Trait 2, and I can read that one out. Let's see. Thanks, Andrea.
So that's going to be down in the high school standards.
Go down a little more.
I guess one thing I would maybe want to add is when they did this update for what's going to be assessed in spring of 27, they didn't change the content. They didn't update the content per se. They updated and created better alignment with the practice. And so the content didn't change, but more or less like how the student is gonna like access that instruction and show demonstration of that content, if that helps.
It does help, and that is kind of where I thought about it, right? And then also the understandability. Does that make sense? That was, I mean, there were two things to it, just being able to do something, and then just the applicability and the understandability was the other thing I thought of. So it's, go down to 12, go down, I'll tell you when to stop, keep going, we're in 8 still. Okay, we're getting closer. You're good. Oh, right there. So it's the trait 2, and let me just read it out. Use mathematical reasoning, and maybe you could tell me how you would see this being applied. Maybe that would make the difference to me. Use mathematical reasoning to support relationship between changing environmental conditions, adaptation by natural selection, and changes to the distribution of traits within a population. So I'm keeping in mind who these students are. Someone tell me how this is taught.
Okay, so there are some additional resources that are provided to teachers from DLM to help support the instruction and also to help support the various access points in which our students can access into that standard. So the standard you're looking at, in essence, would be what we consider the target, right? Where we would want all students, but not necessarily, we know that not all students are performing at that target. So what DLM does, and one of the great things that they do, is they've provided 4 access points for students to enter into that instruction. And you can think of it, if you will, as like a learning progression where it takes that essential element right there, that standards, and it backwards chains the complexity and the skills that would lead up to that. And so they have what they call their sort of, I guess, easiest entry point into that standard is what they call their initial precursor level. And so content and skills and something that would be taught would be just identifying when there is an association between things. So like there's this whole spectrum of the skills that make up what that content is to help teachers teach that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do understand that. I'm just looking at the skill itself, and once again, I'm trying to say, for me, I went back over our standards, right? And I thought, what would be most applicable to this group of students that would be not just applicable, but understandable? Does that make sense? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about significant cognitive delays, right? And being able to make those connections. So, yeah.
So a couple things. So at this level, at the target level for that standard, if a student were at that level in that access point, they would do things like compare data to describe the distribution of traits in a population. They might make a claim that the number of living things in a population with particular traits is effective. So it is definitely a higher in that sort of cognitive
Yeah,
level,
that's what
if
I'm
you
saying.
will.
You're not convincing me.
But
Go ahead,
I
though.
think Milo also might help
Yeah.
bridge that.
So addressing the standard itself, we're looking at changes in traits and distributions. Let's use bunny rabbits, for example. We have brown bunny rabbits and white bunny rabbits that exist in an environment. And maybe we have a couple of years of really harsh winters that come up. And so the white bunny rabbits are going to be more easily camouflaged in the environment. And so the population of white bunny rabbits are going to naturally increase, while the population of brown bunny rabbits, which is easily seen in the white environment during those harsh winters, would then decrease. So the mathematical reasoning that we'd be expecting these students to do, they see the numbers of white bunny rabbits increasing and the numbers of brown bunny rabbits decreasing. So that's kind of maybe an example that
Okay.
we're looking for.
And so, once again, I went back over the science standards, and I sent a couple of recommendations just saying, looking at the student group, I know we're going back to the consortium, because this is coming from them, right, and their recommendations. I actually would recommend we maybe look at a couple of our other standards that may be recommendations for, and I sent some of those on. You guys can give me feedback. Just real quick, I just want to hit what I maybe had suggested, because I think we're looking at a little bit more connectability to students. One of those is develop and use model to illustrate the cycling of matter and flow of energy through living things by the process of photosynthesis and cellular respiration. And keep in mind, this is the regular one.
Yep.
Right? Emphasizing how the products of one reaction are the reactants of the other, and how the energy transfers in these reactions. So that transfer of energy, right, with living things. The other possibility is it just construct an explanation based on evidence that all organisms are primarily composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and that the matter taken into the organism is broken down and combined to make macromolecules necessary for the function of life. I'm going to stop there.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm saying is when I look through these, I'm like, the ability to understand, right? The ability to teach it, and then the applicability to someone's life. So, and these seem to be more connected to things that individual students, I think, of that cognitive nature it's my body, right? Or things growing around me. So anyways, okay, love your feedback.
Yeah. So I didn't introduce myself earlier. So I am Milo Mon, the secondary science education specialist here at USBE. And so like the standards you're referring to, like the little background on the science standards in general, we use what we call phenomena-based three-dimensional teaching and learning that's integrated into our standards. And so our science standards has integrated in the science engineering practices, the cross-cutting concepts, and the DCIs. So the science engineering practices are what the students are doing, and there are 8 specific science engineering practices that include things like develop and use a model, use mathematics and computational thinking, engage in argument from evidence. So that's what students do. We have the cross-cutting concepts, which is kind of how students think. Includes things like patterns, cause and effect, system models as well. And then we have the DCIs, which is the actual content that they're learning about here. And so in these standards and going from the SEED standards to these DLM standards, we are trying to preserve all 3 of those aspects in going from one to the other. And now, in terms of cognitive load, the science engineering practices, not all of them are created equal. Like asking questions is not a necessarily huge cognitive load question. Developing models can also be fairly easy, but computational thinking and mathematics, that could be a little bit more intense. But we are trying to preserve those from one to the other. And so like in terms of the ones that you're citing, board member Earl, develop a model is the science engineering practice that we're using, but on that specific standard. But here we're using mathematical reasoning. And so we're making sure we want to keep that that from one standard to the other through
Why?
preservation.
What, I mean, you've narrowed it, sorry,
Yeah.
you've narrowed it down to 5 standards total. So why would that be necessary for this particular student group versus, and I understand you're trying to stay true to your modeling, right? And I respect that. I'm just like, why?
And I can't necessarily speak to the why we chose the specific standards that
Yeah.
went from one to the other. So I don't know if you guys can on that or.
Is it necessary, maybe a different
Yeah.
question, sorry, the why may not be, is it necessary for this student population, or is there something, an overarching piece that says, once again, like I said, I looked at the applicability versus the, does that make sense? So anyways,
Good morning.
good morning, Sarah.
I'm Tanya Semerad. I am the Autism and Significant Cognitive Disability Specialist. Work hand in hand with Tracy on all of this great stuff that we're talking about. And I really appreciate, Chair Earl, your consideration of the population we're talking about. I just want to say that right away,
Yeah.
because a lot of times I think people don't really know who we're talking about when we're looking at instruction for these students and assessments. So I really appreciate it. And I'm not going to probably answer your question exactly how but I just want to say that one thing that we have in my, many years and working with Tracy here and in the schools, we have had this question, not just about these things you're bringing up today, but about these standards, math, ELA, science for this population. Like,
Right.
why? Can they? Can't they? Like, what are we doing? And so in general, I'm just going to make a general statement. We've really seen that the alignment between the core standards and these standards with the reduction in breadth, depth, and complexity, as Dr. Voorhees mentioned, really does raise the expectations for the students. And it's kind of a way of, we're no longer saying, we're not even gonna get them on the playing field. They couldn't do it. And so, and Tracy mentioned earlier, the access points. And we could dive deep. We go on 4-day trainings about this, but there are so many resources through DLM and through what we've put together to help teachers understand how to teach at the level for where the student is. That they can, it's not gonna look like Tracy said, it's not gonna look like the target even. Sometimes it's just like, we are giving you the basic introduction to this, and guess what, you get that.
Thank you. And I hope you understand, I'm not questioning, it's this standard. Right, and this applicability, because looking at all the others, right? It's raising that expectation. It's being part of what's going on in the classroom, right? It's being able to adapt that and be part of that environment, and I understand that. It's just this standard, I'm looking, in my mind, I'm thinking the applicability, not the narrowing down or the, if that makes sense. It's just the applicability. And to me, that's just as valid as a question as, anything else. It's not trying to remove, a student's ability to engage with the curriculum. It's just that of all the ones we could have picked, all of the others I'm fine. This one, I'm trying to relate it to the relatability of a particular student population.
And I wonder if maybe some of it is also, the standards that in that email that you had shared, that came from our core seed standards. We looked at that and there was not alignment necessarily with that and the essential elements one, as in I think we may have mismatched the essential elements with the core in looking at that, and maybe you can describe a little bit
Yeah,
deeper
so-
for me.
Yeah, so in comparing, again, the standard that you were citing and the standards that we're looking at here in terms of the trait number 2, LS trait 2, like the standard, I didn't pull up which exact one that you had, the one that identified which standard you were looking at in terms of the biology, but I know in terms of looking at the standard that this one would align with, this goes back to biology 3.2, and looking at that whole standard, like there is definitely a significantly difference in terms of the cognitive load going from the standard in bio 3.2 to what we have here for LS trait 2. So does that answer your question there?
Possibly, and so one of the requirements is though that we do, so back to the question about why do we have to have our essential elements, aligning and maintaining those practices and things from the general standard, is part of the requirement when a state either creates or adopts alternate achievement standards, is we do have to show that there is alignment in the content. Does that make sense? So we do have to keep some of that alignment in place.
So are you saying that this particular SCI 12 LS trait 2, you took a standard from this piece, you took a standard from this piece, and you took a standard from this piece, and this was the standard you took from that
No,
piece? Does that make sense? Each
you-
of the different sections?
No, so we took, so when these were created, with special education teachers for this population and science folks, so Tanya and I, and along with Melissa Mendenhall at the time, we actually got in a room with DLM and brought some of our teachers from Utah with significant, who teach those students with significant cognitive disabilities, as well as some of our general education science folks that helped create our core seed standards. And we all got in a room as a consortium and really hashed this out. And so what they did is they took the engineering, I think it was the practices, correct? I'm not the science content specialist here. This is why Milo's helping me. So what we did is when we create these alternate achievement standards, you take that core standard and the concepts or the practices, like the 3 dimensions.
So you wanted to make sure you had each one of those practices represented?
Yes, and then we take that content and we look at now how do we take that and how do we reduce in the depth, breadth, and complexity that one, we want to hold high expectations for those kiddos, right? We want to keep some of that rigor, but also still be in a space for access. So not all of our students necessarily who have been identified as having the most significant cognitive disability and are receiving this instruction, they all may not be at this target level, which is a little bit more complex. So we're reduced.
Sure. And then you would modify it or
And then from
make it
there,
different.
and that's what DLM has provided. And I wonder if maybe what we can do, Leah, is provide you, they call them mini maps in DLM, where it takes that standard, the essential element, and it maps it backwards in complexity and gives those multiple access points. And when looking at that map and the skills that are outlined there for teachers to teach in that progression, that might help alleviate some of that concern as like, how do we as teachers access this? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and once again, it's why we picked this one, and to me, it was of all of the others that could have been used, right? This one seems very, and maybe it is that, it's more complex. To me, it's more complex. You have to understand some interesting narratives to understand the complexity of adaptation and selection and all that. So that it's that component that I said, why this standard, right? And I understand, sorry, I'm probably beating this horse like crazy here. But I know you've done good work, right? I'm not questioning that. So I just wanted to further understand why this one of all of them, and I hope that, I mean, you're on the consortium, that it goes further than just, we want to make sure we're aligning with the national science standard key components, right? But it's got to be that and usability. Does that make sense? To just learn something, but this particular group of students, it's, can they relate it to their life in a way that it's going to have meaning, not just alignment to somebody's, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, so we can by all means take this feedback, right? So like Dr. Voorhees said, Sid McCartney and I can take this feedback to the consortium. And so we can absolutely do that. But I think some of the work to now continue is to take these new standards and work on developing what does an assessment item look like, right? That is applicable to these kiddos, and then producing those instructional resources then to support that.
And so that goes to my question, that's why I started with, what would this look like to teach it? So how would you measure this?
I don't think I can answer that question right now for you. I
Okay.
think that's the work that's happening now, is how do we do that?
Okay.
In
And this is
developing
pretty
that.
set, though, because this is coming from the consortium,
It's
right?
pretty set. And
That's what I wanted to make sure, is that what the flexibility is there, but it sounds like the consortium, we've already voted on the standards, this is where the consortium itself has that's where they've ended, right? So that's where, okay.
And as I'm looking over like all of them as a whole, like there is a lot already in terms of developing and using a model in terms of the practice that's there. And so they would have, I imagine, not having been in the room, but knowing Melissa Mendenhall and what she would have tried to promote and in the room when there, that we would have wanted to have a wide variety of the science engineering practices that was selected. And so if we switch to one of these other ones, like the one that you're suggesting with, that is develop and use a model, we already have a few that already are focusing on that practice. And this might have been one that in terms of looking at all of the other mathematical reasoning ones that we had options to choose from. This might have been the best one to choose from to make that science engineering practice accessible to these students.
Yeah, I do, and I agree with that and understand.
Yeah.
It's just still, once again, it comes back to the applicability, right? We're trying to represent the model, but it sounds like we legally have to create a very similar structure to what we're using with the other. Am I understanding that right? It has to be similar in structure, so therefore you don't want to stray too far from that. But then, once again, in the back of my mind, and maybe it's just me thinking, the applicability, is it usable for a student when they, 2 years down the road, do they understand, so.
Yeah, can I add one comment to what you're saying about, for the purpose of the federal government looking at and approving the process that Utah uses, we have to go through an intense peer review process, which Tracy has done a couple times now, and many staff have participated, and it's so what you said about states, not just Utah, all states and territories who have alternate achievement standards and an alternate assessment have to submit all of that information, process and product information to a peer review committee to ensure that they do actually align with the law.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have one more comment? I can see.
Well, I was, because I mean, I understand your concern and I think it's valid. So I don't want by any means
Yeah.
to think that that concern is not a valid concern. But it's trying to figure out how can we, being part of a consortium, right, where we have say at the table, but we don't have total control in what they do. But I wonder if it would be helpful if we can maybe reach out and work with those folks and maybe come up with like what would be maybe an example item or some additional instructional resources specifically to these two essential elements that you had concern with,
think
and
that would be
bring some
great.
additional information
Yeah.
to kind of ease that mind. And I think we can probably work through something like that.
Yeah, if you could
to
send that
support
out
you.
to the committee, I think, before next month, I would appreciate that.
I think we can do that, Leah.
So,
Yeah,
Okay.
so we'll see what we can pull together to kind of help with that.
Vice Chair Wood?
So this is my language. Okay, math, I'm sorry. Sorry for all the math people in the world, but science, I just like, oh, it's my love language. Anyway, what I love about this one, specific one, is you think about adaptation and you think about, okay, I live next to the ponds in my neighborhood and there are 4 different kind of birds. And you talk about their beaks and their adaptation and how when, the pelican gets the fish with the big, I mean, there's so many things that I think at that level, like you can talk about why are the birds different? Why are they different? Because one can poke the fish, one eats the fish, one eats the bugs. So it is a simple concept of adaptation and needs. So anyway, thank you for being here.
Thank you for letting me drill down on you for a while. So I'm looking for a motion unless there's additional questions. Do you want me to, I think we have paper if anybody wants to. Do you want me to do it?
I move the committee approve the DLM alternate achievement science standards revision and forward to the board for final approval.
Okay, is there any additional discussion? Okay, so the motion before the committee is that the committee approve the DLM alternate achievement science standards revisions and forward to the board for final approval. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you for letting us dig deep and ask the hard questions and get the good answers, so appreciate it. Okay, we're up, our next one is 2.3 action. It's R277325, Public Education Exit and Engagement Surveys. This is an amendment. And, hi.
Hello, Jennifer Wadsworth, Policy Advisor. So in August, the board made some changes to the school climate survey in R277623. And so for 325, we needed to remove some references to 623 and clear up the language of alternating years for the exit survey and the climate survey. That's it.
Would you just quickly explain, there's 2 different surveys. Explain what this one is compared to the other, so we're not mixing the 2 up.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I might actually have to send that to Dr. Voorhees because I am, or if we have, oh, hooray, Dr. Chen is here. I'm going to send that to Dr. Chen.
Just make sure, I just want to make sure we're not mixing up 2 different pieces. So if you don't mind just kind of giving us a broad explanation there.
Testing? Okay. I am Dr. Willie Chen. I am the School Safety Data Analyst for the School Safety Center. I just want to let you all know that I believe Etiana Coley-Mells is the one who actually oversees the public exit engagement survey, and I think she's online. So would it be better to have her lead first since this is the role she oversees?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
And we just need a brief understanding is all. I just want to make sure both the public, like we've had a couple of survey rules go through, making sure we're not mixing up surveys is all.
Okay, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, so my name's Atiana Coley-Mells, and I'm over the exit and engagement survey. And as Dr. Willie Chen said, she's over the climate survey. So we're talking about 3 surveys here, but the rule that is 325 talks about the exit and engagement survey. So the exit survey is administered to educators throughout the year when they are leaving their position from an LEA. And then the engagement survey is given every other year to talk about what is happening for teachers who are currently teaching and their experience in their LEA in schools. So the climate survey is referenced in this rule in one line, and it simply says that it will be administered on the opposite year of the engagement survey. However, changes have been made to when the climate survey is administered. And so currently the engagement survey, which is for teachers who are currently teaching, is administered on an even year. So in 2026, in the winter, it will be administered for this next cycle.
Okay, thank you. I think that was a great summary. Appreciate it. Okay, I'm looking for a motion if there's not any questions.
I'll do it. I'll make a motion that the committee approve R277325, Public Education Exit and Engagement Surveys, Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay, is there any additional discussion? Okay, the motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277325, Public Education Exit and Engagement Surveys, Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes, aye. That passes unanimously. Thank you. You didn't even have to say anything today, but you presented well, so.
You've had to deal with us a lot lately, so that was a good one.
Okay, I'm looking for a final motion unless I've missed anything. Board members, is there anything else? Okay, looking for a motion. Motion to adjourn. Okay, the motion is to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, have a good Friday.